Hello and welcome to another spoiler episode of Umineko. This video is going to have full spoilers for the whole game, the whole thing. Don't watch, don't listen if you've not played right through to the end of episode 8. But first, a broad topic that gets used in this kind of large section of the game is the idea of the wolves and sheep puzzle. Battler gives a fairly simplistic set of rules where if the wolves are even or outnumbering the sheep, then the sheep are in danger. Whereas if the sheep outnumber the wolves, that is the only situation in which the sheep are safe. And basically suggests that this is what they're doing, that they are trying to make sure that the Ashuramiyas, as the alleged sheep, are outnumbering the wolves, who are some unknown number of servants. And one thing about this that I find useful is that it underlines the difference between a game as a construct and the actual real world. If you think about it, logically, the logical rules of the wolf and sheep puzzle do not apply. The very first Twilight was 6 people being killed. If you were to apply even a loosely similar idea of the wolves and sheep puzzle, that requires at least 6 culprits to be evenly matched. At which point, you're talking about all of the servants and Nanjo? Or all of the servants plus Kinzo? Something along those lines. Debatably, Rosa may in fact just suspect every single servant. But more importantly, this sort of undermines the notion of the wolves and sheep puzzle in general being applicable to their situation. It can exist as an abstract notion that, oh, we are in more danger the less we, the safe people, group up. But the reality of the situation is that logical rules of a game do not apply. You'll see this too with Battler pleading with Beatrice to use the red text for Rosa on the game board, but obviously he cannot, because in a weird funny turn, the meta board is closer to in-fiction reality in one sense, but the game board is the so-called real world that cannot be affected by witches. And because of that, Rosa does not have the comfort of Red Truth telling her facts that Meta Battler knows and can then base theories on, because on the game board, Rosa's operating from an incredibly narrow viewpoint, and she does not have rules that she can trust about how wolves and sheep operate. So she simply has to just do her best to be paranoid and very closed off to protect herself and her daughter and her pseudo children, but we'll get to that part. But another way that this impacts Rosa's thinking is that Rosa has a very black and white understanding of the situation. Someone is either on her side or is not. Someone is either a culprit and a murderer, or they are safe, and they are one of the good ones that she has to protect then. The reality of the situation is a little bit messier. We know that Nanjo is complicit without probably killing anybody. The wolves and sheep puzzle does not account for this. You could theoretically imagine a version of the puzzle where there's wolves, sheep, and then, I don't know, the farmer's son who's just a little bit of a shit and will mess around if he's unsupervised. I don't know. But it doesn't, and it suits Rosa's very in-group, out-group, paranoid manner of behaving, where Rosa will do anything she can to protect herself and her closest in-circle. She straight up says herself she will become a demon to protect Maria, and is offering that level of protection to Battler and George, but only to those. And from what I remember, she's going to rescind this from George, and probably Battler too. Because at the end of the day, Rosa victimizes herself a lot, or she sees herself as a victim a lot. She is very quick to set up narratives in which people are against her or are undermining her or are causing her harm, even when maybe they're not, maybe it's complex, or maybe she's 100% wrong and she is actually the one in the wrong. So because of the way Rosa tends to operate, it makes more sense to her to have two buckets of people. There are wolves and there are sheep. Wolves are the people she cannot trust under any circumstance, who will murder her if given a second. And the sheep are the people that she considers safe. And the thing about Rosa too is that she is very quick to label someone a wolf. And once they're a wolf, she will not trust them again. They have been kicked out of the in-group and that is it. I have not played ahead to the part where she sees George again, and I don't know if she even sees George alive again, but I have no expectation of her, when she sees George again, still having the willingness to protect him. My presumption is that once she sees George again, she's like, well, you had your chance and you went to the servants, so now you're very suspicious. In the beginning, she even only seems to trust George and Battler because of a notion that the Ashura Miyas should stick together. It's interesting that there's a very brief moment where she consults with Nanjo and wants to talk to him and seems to somewhat trust him, or at the very least could nominally believe he is on their side, because my presumption is that in this conversation she's effectively asking if he can keep an eye on the others, or let her know, hey, this person seems suspicious, or like, she seems to be effectively setting him up to be her spy. And for that to work, she has to either believe he's innocent, or believe he might be innocent and is the most likely to be innocent. And this is yet another case where Nanjo sort of sits between the servants and the family, as a middle stage where he is still a service worker for the family, and he is absolutely not part of the family, but he is more respected and trusted, despite, I mean, he's been a long-term doctor of Kinzo's, but he has not worked with the family directly as much, in a way that, realistically, you should say that the servants have earned trust more, but as we see at the very end, that trust doesn't mean shit to Rosa. She does not care and does not trust the servants, even slightly. And branching off from that, there's a very key line Rosa says, where she says the brain speed of a little sister is always the big sister's -1. Right now, there's no one I need to worry about offending. Which tells you a lot about the ways in which Rosa hides herself, or limits herself, or will sideline and kind of step out of the way, avoid attention. Because when she says she is her big sister -1, what she's saying is that she doesn't appear to be smart, because she doesn't want to aggravate Ava. She doesn't want to cause enough attention that Ava might actually be worried about Rosa being too smart. And we kind of see snippets of this in other places anyway, where a lot of people will underestimate Rosa and think little of her, where when she lets it show, she can be pretty capable. Next episode, we're going to see her solving the riddle of the epitaph, and Ava only solves it in the first place because of Rosa accidentally just blurting out when she uncovers part of the riddle. Where Ava might not have figured it out at all, if not for Rosa just kind of letting slip as she was figuring out the steps. But in a certain way, you also have to read this line and think, what else has Rosa been limiting due to her siblings? We've said before that Rosa, in one sense, feels like she's on the bottom rung. Now, she is on the bottom rung of the Ashura Miya siblings. That still puts her above all of the spouses and children, but it still ends up to her feeling like she is getting shit on constantly. With all of her older siblings removed, then she can reach her full potential. She is not afraid of anyone. She is the most powerful person on this island. A little preview of the Whodunnit later. I'm pretty sure she knows Kinzo's dead. So she is in charge. And there is no one to second guess her unless the culprits, etc. want to actually try to overpower her. But that's not going to happen once she gets a gun. Which just really blatantly shows the power dynamic of the situation. When she's got a gun, she can point at people and be like, you can definitely trust me, because if I was in any way the culprit, I'd just blow your head off right now. So, let's all work together and I'll take care of you. There's even a moment where Rosa quotes Kraus as saying, might is right. And that's a classic kind of somewhat fascist, authoritarian notion that whoever's in power just get to assert their will, because if they're in power, they probably deserve to be there. And Rosa's now thinking, hey, maybe that's true now that I'm in power. But more importantly, this kind of indicates the ways in which she has learned lessons from her siblings. I think I've discussed this briefly before already, but I mean, she has all of the coping mechanisms and abuses of power that her older siblings had, because she's been on the receiving end of all of these things, and she's now a cocktail of all of their different vices and different ways of mishandling situations. And she even, right after quoting Kress on this, she tries to appeal to them of, oh, you know what I'm normally like, so you know what I'm doing right now is not me. In a strange way where she's trying to distance herself from ways she knows she's being maybe not immoral, but at least disagreeable. People would look at her behavior and be like, whoa, what's happening here? This is a lot. And she's aware of this and is telling them like, hey, don't judge me too much. Because you know normally I'm that affable aunt who like makes an effort to seem very disarmingly charming and just friendly and is not sinister at all. Even though they also know she abuses Maria regularly. So she's not free of sin normally. This is just her being more upfront about certain aspects of her personality. She is worried about those aspects being read as who she is, because in a sense those are part of her. Who you are is made up of many parts and differs from person to person in how they see you, and she would prefer that at the very least her close family members continue to see the Rosa she has presented to them, and not the Rosa she has specifically tried to hide. In happier places, we get a look at all of the servants kind of just having a chill time, where they go and they're like, Goda's making soup and everyone's like, oh nice, we're finally gonna get food, we are so hungry, and just eating cold food out of tins is really not very satisfying. And it's kind of funny how this also undermines the wolf and sheep dynamic, because we know there are accomplices in that kitchen. In fact, assuming it's similar to the first game, everyone except Goda is in some way an accomplice to the murders. Or their bodies at the very least, depending on what Shannon's specific standing is. We're going to get more of that. But the point being that this undermines the wolves and sheep dynamic in some sense, because there's a lot of people here that are a little bit more comfortable with the murder situation, with the way group dynamics actually work. You tend to adjust to the environment and vibe of who you're with. Rosa's deeply paranoid and afraid, which is why she's insisting they don't eat food in case it's poisoned. When all the servants go to the kitchen and multiple of them are much more chill about the murder situation, they're like, yeah, we can just eat. We don't need to worry about poison. We should eat a nice lunch. And they can relax more and they can just be overall happier. Which, in one sense, is showing the way their behaviors are modified by the group they're in. Which makes it a lot harder to think of people as distinctly just a sheep or a wolf. Especially in one sense, Goda is a useful tool of the narrative that Beatrice is spinning for this episode. He is not complicit, but he is being utilized to push forward a certain presentation of the murders. And in one sense, you could argue that makes him a wolf if he is a party to an impossible murder that confuses the situation and muddies the waters when talking to Rosa. But at the same time, it would be extremely harsh to claim that this means he should be counted among the culprits and that he should not be trusted, because he is simply confused. Then, after Kumasawa and Nanjo have been killed, or quote-unquote killed, we'll get to that in the back half of the video, when trying to explain this, Goda finds it impossible to put into words what they saw, and Genji and Shannon largely agree, though in their cases I think it's intentional. And Rosa, still in a simplistic way of thinking, is insisting, is like, well, was it a man or a woman? It should be at least easy to tell me if the culprit was male or female. Because again, Rosa has a very basic understanding of like, well, these two categories should be easy to sort out. Can we at least narrow down things? Can we at least get basic information here? Whereas Goda's still trying to parse how he saw something that seemed literally impossible. And because of Rosa's simplistic way of understanding these things, she cannot fathom that this is a sincere confusion, and thinks simply, if you can't give me this basic and simple information, you are withholding it. The moment where Rosa officially decides she does not trust the servants and forces them to give up their master keys. This is an echo of a moment from episode 1, but there's actually a very key difference to how Rosa handles this compared to how Natsuhi handled this. Natsuhi has kind of always had a distrust of the servants because of their relationship to Kinzo, the fact that they know he is dead and they have a strange kind of leverage over her. Rosa has no particular relationship with the servants one way or the other, besides being an employer and the power dynamic that entails. In the first episode, based on how Natsuhi handles the servants and giving up their key and leaving, she seems to have a more sincere understanding of how disrespectful it is that she is distrusting them. And this does not stop her from having this distrust, but there is still a kind of respect and regret over what is happening. We get the same kind of spiel from Natsuhi and Rosa, where they're like, I'm so sorry about this is a bizarre situation. In the morning, let's drink tea and forget about this. I'm sorry it had to be this way, but thank you for understanding. And then Rosa fucking says, those people are liars, God. You think I'd be stupid enough to believe they gave me their keys? What a trick, what a ruse. This is after Shannon literally breaks down crying because of the fact that she has given more than half of her life. Well, given that it's Shannon, she's sacrificed 10 years. She's maybe given her whole life because of how Shannon's life started. And she thought she had a good relationship with these people. And without even seeing the part where Rosa's mask off about the servants, just in the moment where Rosa's like, I don't trust these people, we cannot be convinced that you are not the culprits, this is devastating to Shannon. And Rosa does not give a shit. Rosa's still in the mindset of like paranoia and self-interest, whereas she is only concerned with making sure she and Maria and hopefully Battler or George can survive. She does not care about the collateral of the servants. She just wants to keep people safe, and she will let the servants die, and she would probably not care if the servants died. I don't even get the sense that she is concerned that a single one of them could be innocent, because she is much more worried about keeping a tiny number of people to live through the night. The narration literally says, in response to Shannon's breakdown, you can kill a person without using a knife. That moment specifically may factor heavily into Shannon's motivation for resisting Beatrice or not. That'll be in the next spoiler video, but Shannon maybe does not have much faith in the Shioramias as a whole, and this scene feels like a really key moment of her understanding how much faith she should have in them. An interesting contrast to that is that, faced with the idea of having to distrust the servants, Battler refuses so much that this is, temporarily, as we'll see, enough to make him believe in witches. This is enough to change his understanding of the world, rather than change his faith in the people he has a relationship with. To varying extents. Like I said, he barely knows Goda, but he still refuses to believe Goda could have killed anyone. And this is the kind of... This is a big part of Battler's stubborn refusal to lose faith in the servants and his family members. That is in some places misplaced, because for instance, he maybe shouldn't have much faith in Rosa given her behavior in this episode. But at the same time, his faith in the servants is a lot more heartwarming and probably would be reassuring for them. But he is ultimately not the Ashura in charge, and so he doesn't get to make decisions and stop Rosa from doing what she's doing. God, I even forgot Genji's line. Genji's line, "Furniture entrusts its fate to the family. If I could regain your trust by giving up this life of mine, I would consider it a great honor." Rosa doesn't even care about that kind of level of sacrifice. She doesn't seem like she would even feel bad that he had died for this. She would just feel safer and more comfortable, knowing that there was one less potential suspect to deal with. And actually, on the topic of Battler being very innocent and very trusting, he babblingly says to George that it's like he doesn't even want to suspect the servants. He's staying with Rosa because he's a little bit lost at this point, not sure what to do. But none of the inheritance or gold or anything like that matters to him. George's response is a little bit funny because George says he understands, and I know better than anyone how pure your heart is, Battler-kun. Which is funny because that almost feels like an admission of George that it is a little bit naive to not suspect the servant still. George is going with Shannon because he wants to protect her. He doesn't believe Shannon could have done it at all, but he's willing to believe that there is still a culprit. He doesn't know who it is, and there's even an implication here that George maybe doesn't trust the other servants right now. Maybe he has no particular suspicions, but he has no real innocent, naive belief in the rest of the servants the way that Battler does. And now, one brief little bit before we go on to some of the Whodunnit style stuff. Beatrice mocks Battler a little bit for him losing heart and being lost and kind of finding no firm ground to be able to argue what's going on here. There's a couple interesting things. Beatrice says she cannot say the red text to Rosa because there is still someone who doesn't believe she exists. In his heart of hearts, Battler's mind has not been changed, and that's part of his distress because honestly, if he fully and truly just believed in Beatrice, he wouldn't have this conflicted distress and despair in this moment because he would be comfortable in his understanding that it was Beatrice. His breakdown here is because he's almost clinging to a lie he's clinging to something he believes to be a lie, but is trying to convince himself of. And we know that won't take and that won't stick, and that he's going to push back again. It will just take some time for him to regain his ability to do so. And it's also a strangely tacit acknowledgement that Rosa does believe in Beatrice in this moment. More on that in the Whodunnit segment. And then lastly, Beatrice, taunting Battler, says that he is now going to be furniture. Specifically, she notes, clothing is proof of one's humanity. From now on, you will become furniture, so it's only natural that you will lose that right. And this is a fun line because in a certain sense, this is actually acknowledging the personhood of Shannon, Cannon, Beatrice. They're all distinct people with distinct outfits. It does not matter that the body they share is the same. Their presentation and identities are distinct in a way that makes them human, even if Beatrice won't admit that to them. And in some ways, Beatrice will often refer to herself as a witch in a way that distances herself from humans. And in a sense, seems to imply that she is a much more severe idea of Battler being furniture and having humanity stripped away from him because of his sin and to try and, I suspect, motivate him, because Beatrice is playing this game with Battler because she wants a stubborn opponent who will fight tooth and nail until he genuinely, truly changes his mind. And she wants him to genuinely and truly change his mind and broaden and understand the situation. And so she kind of needs to goad him and press and torture him until he will flip and realize that he needs to fight back and continue on the game. But now it's time to talk about Whodunnit, and this one's a tough one. When people make theories for these things, especially the first time through when you don't even understand the nature of the culprit, it's very easy to get into some wacky territory, and in some ways that's still useful to try and think about the literal physicality of what has happened, because even if what you say might sound ridiculous on its face, there ends up being an actual reasonable version of what you said that was just a little bit harder to grasp at or parse. Anyway, I think Cannon might have been a big balloon full of blood. We do not see the scene of Cannon from Battler's perspective, so we do not get the detective's perspective on things. For that reason, we cannot treat it as objective. Not that the detective's fully objective, but it is trustworthy. But given Goda's presence, I don't think Goda's ever an accomplice. I just don't think that's his MO. So they have to have fooled him in some sense. And we do know that there is a bunch of blood in the scene when they get there. So I think at first I was kind of contemplating some version of them using Kinzo's corpse and that being the thing they carry around, but in a way that seemed very clumsy. He'd be completely the wrong shape. He would already be rotted. They could fake blood all over him and stuff, because I think the blood is actually some sort of paint mixture or whatever, because that doesn't seem that hard to fake. No one's going to look at it that closely, and all you really need is red splashed everywhere. The narration often refers to it as paint anyway, which feels like an intentional, consistent hint. So that part, it does not seem like it would be hard to get buckets of blood spread around this room. The part that is hard is Goda laying hands on this thing, whatever it is. They've clearly used Cannon's clothes to dress someone up. They mentioned being covered in mud and quote-unquote blood, so it would be easy to obscure what it is. The narration never mentions Goda getting close, so you can kind of intuit that he might keep his distance. He's a little bit of a coward. He did not enjoy the sight of the chapel, so I can't imagine he was shoving his face in close. Oh, okay, let's walk through the steps as we've read them. Maybe some unreliable information mixed in here, and then there's some gaps where where things are not explicitly stated. Goda is the one who sees Cannon, and we know this as well because Goda will repeat this later, so this does seem to be fully correct. They see a figure who has fallen over. Then Nanjo is the one who rushes over. As the doctor, he's obviously giving personal and direct medical attention, and asks people to give him a hand to move Cannon to the servants' room. And we know Goda is the kind of servant who doesn't generally like to give a hand unless it's in a specific situation that he can seem good in. So I would not be surprised if he hung back during this section. Cannon gets laid on the table. He's mostly lying there making noises, which are maybe made by Shannon. It's notable that when Shannon leaves, Cannon is said to go silent. He does continue to speak while she is absent, but he stopped making ambient noises in a way that felt a little bit like a clue to me that perhaps Shannon was making some noises on his behalf and then ran away, and then no one was making noises on behalf for a bit. And also, because Cannon's a little bit of a zombie Cannon, he's got red eyes and stuff, if his voice was different, would in some sense only make sense, especially with being allegedly stabbed in the lungs and like having blood oozing out. The part where the narration claims that he like digs around in his wound and stuff, I just don't think that could have happened per se. All of that feels like they were performing some level of theater for Goda as a person who is not directly seeing it. As a person who would probably look away when such things were happening. The much more tangible part to me is Goda pinning quote-unquote Cannon to the wall and then seeing the red quote-unquote blood on his hand after the fact. I think it would be ludicrous to claim that there was nothing there. It is slightly less ludicrous to think there was a balloon. The reason why I say a balloon is, if you can have some sort of container full of blood, it is a thing that would have some degree of weight, but could burst into practically nothing very suddenly. This does feel ludicrous, I know. But to speak more broadly, I think there was likely an object approximating a body dressed in Cannon's clothes, filled with blood or some way set up to ooze blood or leak blood around the room in order to give the very clear indication of a crime scene, and that Goda could tangibly touch, but could then, in a moment, seem to disappear. Now, a balloon popping is a way of a thing disappearing. That is the closest I can get to an explanation for what this is. I would be amazed if I was actually correct. I have a feeling that I'm either missing a key detail that might help think of a more straightforward method than a big balloon. But I do feel like the core of what is happening is that they are putting on a little play for Goda and giving him enough information to make it seem tangible. And in one sense, having a group of people insist upon something will do a lot to convince a person. When Goda opens the door, he sees a weird, muddy, bloody body and is like, what the fuck? And it is other people that start going, oh my god, it's Cannon, are you alive? Are you dying? And they fill in a lot of information. This is a lot of how magic works. You seed information. You don't turn to Goda and say, Goda, that's Cannon. He must still be alive. But if you act as if those are all true things, it's a lot easier for Goda to accept those as true and assume that that must be the case. As for how the locked room works, well, for one, I'm fairly sure neither Nanjo nor Kumasawa died in that moment. I'm pretty sure that they basically, somehow again, burst some fake blood all over themselves to give a distinct impression of death, scared the shit out of Goda enough to have him run away, giving them time to leave, escape. Now here's the part that's tricky. I, at first, thought them locking the door was simple, because, yes, they leave both of their keys in an envelope, so clearly those are out of commission. But also the other master keys are out of commission. Because Shannon and Genji both have their keys and present their keys to Rosa in that moment. At that point, no one's keys are unaccounted for. So with all of the keys accounted for, how the hell did this happen? I'm annoyed when I thought this one was going to be simple. I actually don't have an answer for this now. One thing that does make this stuff tricky is that they don't provide a lot of... Obviously, the first episode had no red text, but even this one, Battler's reasoning is very basic, and so there's not a lot of red text to cut down more advanced theories someone might come up with. I will be consulting the episode 4... I don't know if it's the tea party or the question mark section, where a lot of red text does get tossed out to kind of tighten up these mysteries, and I will be using that in probably the second last episode when I make my kind of... in the second last spoiler episode for episode 2. In the second last spoiler video for this episode, I will kind of make a final declaration of the best I can imagine for the theory and see how it lines up with that red text and see if there's any kind of refining I can do there. And then read people's comments and stuff before the final spoiler episode, where I'll probably then go, oh, I can't believe I thought it was a balloon. Oh my god. In broader theorizing, I'm less convinced that George is actually doing anything at all. I've played ahead to the next part, which will involve them going to the chapel. Yeah, I don't think George is doing much of anything except believing in Shannon. Any weird things I picked up on didn't seem to indicate enough that unless there are later mysteries that make more sense with George being a culprit or an accomplice, I am no longer considering him an element of the mystery. In terms of Rosa as an actor in this mystery, I am oscillating between thinking that Beatrice has set up a game for her or thinking that she is straight up playing Beatrice's part. There's points in which Battler will notice that it's odd that Rosa wants to go examine these two bodies rather than just staying safe and hiding in the parlor. That to me feels like because Rosa either needs to take part in Beatrice's play or take part in Beatrice's game. When I say game, I am half wondering if Rosa is meant to solve a wolves and sheep's puzzle. Is she meant to somehow find the accomplices and the culprit? Has Beatrice straight up told Rosa people are dying? Unlike in episode 1 where Ava and Hideyoshi thought it was kind of a game that Kinzo was playing. Is this a case where Rosa knows there is actual death happening, and so, as she herself says, has gone into demon mode and is doing whatever she can to basically survive the weekend, at which she expects to be the new head, to take over, to be the sole survivor of the Ashuramiyas? Because if she is just been given lines by Beatrice, it almost feels like she is drifting from the script at times. It's like Rosa has been given a part to play, but is adding her own improvisations that are maybe subverting what necessarily Beatrice would want. There's moments that stand out to me at least where Rosa will say a lot of stuff and then Maria will just have a kind of ellipsis reaction that to me is almost Maria being frustrated with how Rosa's playing the game. Whether or not that's strictly speaking what's happening, but I could really see Maria as being the little referee for monitoring Beatrice's game. And as Rosa has declared earlier, she will not let Maria out of her sight. And in some ways, it's a little bit suspicious how somewhat unflappable Rosa is. We've seen Rosa fly off the handle. We've seen Rosa become deeply emotional and respond incredibly rashly to much smaller situations than her family being murdered. And she is still being paranoid and aggressive, but in some ways it seems like she's got a situation under control in a very suspicious manner. Almost like she knows what's happening, what to expect, and how she should be responding. Again, she literally talked face to face with Beatrice. She is the only one to have a straightforward conversation with Beatrice, and we don't even know how long that conversation went on necessarily. So I see no version of episode 2 that does not mean Beatrice has been manipulating Rosa, even if Rosa thinks she has free agency in the situation. We'll see how that continues to pan out, because I really don't remember how any of the final Twilights here go. I half expect them to just turn up 3 dead bodies at once. I guess that did happen in episode 1. But I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of this out and seeing how that helps me refine the theories, because during the episode, theories can oscillate wildly. See my section about George. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.